He meant it as a joke. 8 years of friendship, 8 years of lazy Sunday breakfasts and school play photographs and late-night phone calls about nothing, and he threw it all into the fire with 4 stupid words. "You'll never get married." He laughed. She didn't. And in the silence that followed, Emma Brooks said the one thing that changed everything. "If I ever did, I'd want it to be you." Nathan Sterling stopped breathing. The music played on. The festival lights blinked gold and pink above the crowded square. His daughter was somewhere nearby eating cotton candy, and the woman who had quietly loved them both for 8 years had finally, accidentally, told the truth. If this story already has your heart racing, you're exactly where you belong. Subscribe to this channel right now and follow this story all the way to the end, because what happens next will wreck you in the best possible way. Hit that like button, drop your city and country in the comments below, and let me see how far this story has traveled. Now, let's go back to where it all began. The town of Clover Ridge had a way of making everything feel like it mattered more than it probably should. Maybe it was the way the old oak trees arched over Main Street like they were listening. Maybe it was the way neighbors actually knew each other's names, knew each other's coffee orders, knew when something was wrong before you said a single word. Or maybe it was just that in a town this size there was nowhere to hide, and the annual spring festival made that fact undeniable every single year. String lights were strung between the lampposts the same way they had been for 30 years. Food vendors lined the square with kettle corn and funnel cake and those little paper cups of lemonade that were never quite sweet enough but somehow tasted perfect anyway. Kids ran in every direction while their parents pretended to keep track of them. A local band played covers of songs everyone recognized but nobody could quite name. It was by every measure an ordinary evening in Clover Ridge. Except that it wasn't. Not this year. Not after what Emma said. Nathan Sterling didn't look like what people imagined when they heard the word billionaire. He wasn't polished. He wasn't distant. He showed up to the spring festival in dark jeans and a plain gray Henley with the sleeves pushed to his elbows. His 7-year-old daughter Lily perched on his shoulders like she owned him, which, honestly, she did. He had the kind of face that had been lived in. Not old, but weathered in a way that came from real things, not easy ones. A jaw that needed a shave 2 days ago, eyes that were a dark, quiet brown, and noticed more than he ever said out loud. He'd built his company, Sterling Development Group, from a single construction contract he'd won at 23 with a borrowed truck and a crew of 4 guys he paid in cash. By 32, he had offices in 4 cities, commercial projects across 8 states, and more money than his parents, both of them combined, had ever seen in their lifetimes. The Clover Ridge Gazette had tried to run a profile on him twice. He'd declined both times. What he hadn't been able to decline, not even once in 8 years, was Emma Brooks. Emma wasn't easy to describe without making her sound like a character someone invented to make a point. She was 30 years old, worked 3 jobs. The morning shift at the Clover Ridge Diner, afternoon bookkeeping at a small accounting firm 2 blocks over, and weekend tutoring for middle school kids who needed help with math, and still somehow managed to show up for every single thing that mattered to the people she cared about. She drove a 2011 Honda Civic with a cracked dashboard and a passenger side window that only rolled down halfway. She owned exactly 4 nice dresses and rotated them for weddings and funerals and things she couldn't get out of. She was not beautiful in the way magazines describe beauty. She was beautiful the way a person becomes beautiful when you've watched them be genuinely good for long enough that their face starts to look like something you can't imagine the world without. Nathan had never once said that out loud. To anyone, including himself. They had met 8 years ago at a city planning meeting. Nathan pitching a mixed-use development project, Emma representing a neighborhood tenant association trying to make sure the lower-income residents didn't get pushed out. They had argued for 40 minutes in front of a room full of uncomfortable city officials. Then they had gotten coffee afterward and argued for another 2 hours, and somewhere in the middle of all of it, they had become, without either of them fully deciding to, best friends. Inab. 8 years was a long time. Long enough for Nathan's marriage to fall apart. A clean split on paper, brutal in every way that paper didn't cover, and for Emma to show up with groceries and no questions and stay until Lily fell asleep. Long enough for Lily to learn Emma's phone number before she learned her own address, Because Emma was the person you called when something was wrong and you didn't want to worry Dad. Long enough for the three of them to develop rhythms and rituals that felt like family without anyone ever using the word. Sunday breakfasts at the diner where Emma worked because Lily liked the pancakes shaped like bears, and the cook made them special for her. Annual trips to the pumpkin patch in October that always ended with Nathan carrying a pumpkin twice the size any reasonable person would choose, while Emma and Lily walked ahead laughing at him. Holiday dinners where Emma sat at their table like she'd always belonged there, which she had, which everyone could see, which neither of them acknowledged. Everyone in Clover Ridge had an opinion about Nathan Sterling and Emma Brooks. The women at the diner were convinced they were secretly together. The guys Nathan knew from his construction sites figured he was an idiot. Even Lily, at 7, had asked Emma once in a very serious voice if she was going to be her mom someday. A question that had made Emma laugh so hard she cried, which Lily had interpreted as a yes, which Emma had never corrected. But nothing had ever been said. Not directly. Not honestly. Until the spring festival. Until Nathan's stupid joke. It had started, as most disasters do, with a moment of feeling comfortable. The festival was in its 3rd hour. Lily had been claimed by a group of school friends and was somewhere near the face-painting booth. Nathan and Emma had found a spot near the edge of the square on one of the old wooden benches, sharing a plate of food they'd each contributed to. Her kettle corn, his pulled pork sandwich, a shared order of curly fries that were already going cold. Emma had been telling him about a man she'd met at the accounting firm. A client, mid-40s, divorced, kept finding reasons to stop by her desk. He asked if I wanted to get dinner, she said, stealing a fry. And? I said I was busy. Were you? She gave him a look. I'm always busy. You could make time. Nathan, I'm just saying. He leaned back against the bench, watching the square. You're 30 years old, Em. At some point you've got to... Don't. I'm not saying anything bad. You're about to say something annoying. He grinned. It was the grin that Lily had inherited. Lopsided, a little too confident, the kind of grin that made it hard to stay annoyed with him. I'm just saying that at this rate, you're never going to find a husband. He meant it the way you mean things when you're comfortable. A tease. The kind of thing that lands differently between people who know each other well enough to be careless with each other. Emma didn't laugh. She went quiet in a way that was different from her regular quiet. Her eyes dropped to the paper plate in her lap. She pressed her lips together. He saw something move across her face that he didn't have a name for, and for a second, just a second, he thought he'd actually hurt her feelings, which hadn't been his intention, and he was already opening his mouth to backpedal when she spoke. If I ever got married, Emma said, very carefully, very quietly, like she was measuring each word before she let it go, I think I'd want it to be you. The festival kept happening around them. The band played. A kid somewhere shrieked with laughter. The smell of fried dough moved through the air. Nathan heard all of it from a very far distance because something in his chest had just stopped. Not his heart, but something adjacent to it, some gear in the machinery he didn't know was running until it suddenly wasn't. He looked at her. She was still looking at the plate. Her jaw was tight. Her ears had gone red, which happened when she was embarrassed. He knew that, had known it for years, had just never tracked it the way he was tracking it right now. Emma, don't. Her voice was still quiet, but there was something new in it, something that had shut a door. I know how that sounded. Forget I said it. It was a dumb thing to say. It wasn't, I meant it as a joke. She finally looked up, and her eyes were doing that thing where she was working very hard to look like everything was fine. You know, since you said I'd never get married, I was just... You said, I think, Nathan said. She blinked. What? You said, I think I'd want it to be you. That's not how you tell a joke. When you're joking, you don't hedge. For 3 full seconds, Emma Brooks had no expression at all on her face. Then something in her eyes shifted, like a light turning off behind glass, and she stood up from the bench and said, very normally, I'm going to find Lily, and walked into the crowd. Nathan sat there with cold, curly fries, and the particular silence that follows something that cannot be unsaid. He didn't go after her, not immediately. He told himself it was because he didn't want to make it worse. He told himself she needed space. He told himself, and this was the one that kept replaying on the drive home, that he wasn't sure what he would have said anyway. Lily chattered the whole way back about a girl named Sophie who had gotten a butterfly painted on her cheek, and whether she could have a pet butterfly because they were basically just fancy moths, and moths weren't scary if you thought about them as butterflies with bad PR. Nathan made the appropriate sounds. He helped her wash her face and brush her teeth, and he sat on the edge of her bed and read 2 chapters of her current book, a story about a girl who discovers her grandmother is secretly a lighthouse keeper. And when Lily finally went to sleep, he sat there longer than he needed to. He kept thinking about what Emma's face had looked like in that half second before she composed herself. Not embarrassed, not joking, honest. Toch. Emma didn't call that night. This was unusual enough that he noticed. They talked almost every day, man. Not always long, not always about anything important. Just the kind of contact that had become baseline. Her number appeared on his phone so regularly that Lily had once asked if Emma was his work wife, which was a phrase she had clearly picked up from someone at school and did not fully understand, and Nathan had said no, she's just Emma in a voice that probably answered more than he intended. She didn't call the next day either, or the day after that. By Thursday, he had texted her twice, once with a picture of Lily's drawing that he thought she'd find funny, once just asking how she was doing, and she had responded to both of them. Short, fine, a smiley face. The kind of text you sent when you wanted to appear present without actually being present. Nathan knew Emma well enough to know that she was punishing herself. That was her pattern. Had always been her pattern. When she felt she had done something wrong or said something that couldn't be taken back, she didn't blow up. She didn't make it someone else's problem. She just quietly removed herself and tried to take up less space. He hated it. He had always hated it about her. Not because it was wrong, but because she was always removing herself from rooms she had every right to be standing in. He threw himself into work the way he always did when he didn't want to sit with something uncomfortable. There was plenty of it. A commercial development project in the neighboring county was behind schedule because of a supplier issue that had cascaded into a framing delay. His project manager, a competent but high-strung man named Derek, called 3 times a day. Nathan took the calls and made the decisions and sorted through the mess with the particular focus that had built his company. And in between all of it, he thought about Emma's voice saying, "I think I'd want it to be you," in that careful, measured way that sounded less like a joke every time he replayed it. He was 40 minutes into a site review on Friday afternoon when his phone rang and he glanced down, expecting Derek, and saw the name Mom instead. He let it go to voicemail. His mother called back 12 seconds later. "Margaret," he said. "Don't Margaret me," his mother said. "I ran into Emma this morning at the grocery store." Nathan said nothing. "She looked terrible," Margaret Sterling said, in the specific tone of a woman who had been biting her tongue for 8 years and had finally decided she was done with that. "Not sick terrible, sad terrible. There's a difference, and you know it." "Mom, what happened at the festival?" Nothing happened. Nathan. The way she said his name, 2 syllables but somehow infinite, made him close his eyes and press 2 fingers to the bridge of his nose. He was 32 years old and the owner of a company that employed 400 people, and he had just been reduced to a teenager by the specific maternal deployment of his own first name. "We had a conversation," he said. "About?" He watched one of his crew guys measuring a wall 40 feet away and not looking at him. "About some things that probably should have been said a long time ago." There was a pause, then his mother said very quietly, "Nathan, don't be an idiot. I have watched that woman show up for you and Lily for 8 years. I have watched her bring food when you forgot to eat and talk Lily through nightmares over the phone at 2 in the morning and sit in the second row at every single school performance, even when she worked a double shift that same day. I have watched her do everything that—" She stopped, recalibrated. "I'm not saying it to pressure you. I'm saying it because I don't think you see what everyone else sees." Nathan leaned against the side of his truck. "She said something," he admitted, "at the festival, and I didn't respond the right way." How should you have responded? He didn't answer that. Right, Margaret said. Call her. It's not that simple. Most things that feel complicated aren't, she said, which was the kind of thing Nathan had found annoying his entire life and increasingly suspected was true. Call her, Nathan. She hung up. He didn't call her that night. He didn't call her that weekend. He told himself he was waiting for the right moment, which was something people told themselves when they were afraid and didn't want to admit it. He was afraid. Had been afraid for a long time, longer than he'd been willing to look at directly. His marriage, brief, earnest, ultimately a collision between two people who had wanted different things and discovered it too late, had left a specific kind of damage in him. Not the dramatic kind. Not bitterness or rage. Just a quiet, persistent belief that he was not someone who got to have what he wanted in that particular category of life. That the best he could do was protect Lily and build his company and maintain the friendships that already existed without pushing past the edges of them. Emma had always been at the edge, and she had just told him, very quietly, very honestly, that she was willing to step over it, except she hadn't framed it as an invitation. She had framed it as an accident. A slip. Something to be walked back and forgotten. He didn't know what to do with that yet, but he knew. Sitting in his truck in the driveway of the house he'd bought 4 years ago and had never fully figured out how to make feel like a home, that the idea of Emma quietly withdrawing, of her making herself smaller and more distant until the space between them became permanent, was the one thing he could not organize his life around. He just didn't know what he was going to do about it. Not yet. Lily asked about Emma on Sunday morning. They were at the diner. Same booth as always, same bare pancakes, same orange juice that Lily would drink half of and then forget about. And Lily looked up from her plate with the particular directness that 7-year-olds deployed without understanding the damage it could do. How come Emma hasn't come for breakfast in 2 weeks? Nathan poured more syrup on his pancakes that he didn't need. She's been busy. With work? Yeah. Lily considered this with a small frown. She's always busy with work. She still always comes. She'll come back around, Lil. You didn't fight, did you? He looked up. Lily was watching him with those dark eyes that looked exactly like his mother's, which was genetically improbable but somehow true, and her expression was entirely too perceptive for someone who still slept with a stuffed elephant named Gerald. We didn't fight, he said. Then why does she seem sad? Nathan put down his fork. You've seen her? She came by the school on Tuesday to drop off my library book, Lily said. I forgot it, and she found it, and she dropped it off. She seemed sad. She hugged me for a really long time. She looked at her plate. I don't like when Emma's sad. Nathan stared at his coffee. Emma had driven across town to return a library book she hadn't needed to return. She had hugged his daughter for a long time and said nothing about any of it to him. That was Emma in a single image. That was 8 years of Emma, condensed. The woman who loved his daughter without being asked to. The woman who showed up without being invited. The woman who had carried feelings for 8 years and only let them surface once, by accident, at a spring festival on an ordinary Wednesday evening, and had spent the 2 weeks since trying to take them back. He looked across the booth at his daughter, who was looking back at him with a frown that said, do something. And Nathan Sterling, for the first time in 2 weeks, made a decision. He pulled out his phone. He found Emma's name. His thumb hovered. Then he put the phone face down on the table and finished his breakfast, because the thing he was about to do was not something that belonged in a text message. It was something that required showing up. And he'd figure out what to say when he got there. He brought cinnamon rolls. Not because it was a grand gesture. Not because he'd thought it through and decided that baked goods were the correct opening move for whatever conversation he was walking into. He brought them because he'd passed the bakery on Elm Street on his way to Emma's apartment, and he'd stopped because his hands needed something to do, and the woman behind the counter had already had the bag open before he said a word, because he bought cinnamon rolls from her every Sunday, and she knew his order and the normalcy of that, of being known in small, ordinary ways, had nearly undone him standing at the counter at 9:45 in the morning. He sat in his truck outside Emma's building for 4 minutes. He knew it was 4 minutes because he watched the clock on his dashboard the way a man watches something when he's trying not to think about what he's actually doing. The building was a 3-story walk-up on Caldwell Street, red brick, one of the older ones in Clover Ridge that hadn't been renovated yet. Emma lived on the 2nd floor. He had been to her apartment more times than he could count, for dinner, for movie nights with Lily, for the one terrible week 2 years ago when her landlord had a plumbing disaster and she'd needed a place to land, and he had never once stood outside it for 4 minutes working up nerve. He got out of the truck. He knocked. There was a pause long enough that he started to wonder if she was home, and then the sound of movement inside. And then the door opened, and Emma was standing there in an oversized University of Michigan sweatshirt she'd owned since at least the first year they'd known each other, and her hair pulled up in the kind of way that meant she hadn't planned on anyone seeing her today. And she looked at him, then at the bag in his hand, then back at him. "I didn't call," he said. "No," she agreed. "I thought if I called, you'd have time to think of a reason not to be here." Something moved across her face. Not quite a smile, not quite annoyance. She stepped back from the door without saying anything else, which was Emma's version of come in, and he did. Her apartment looked the way it always looked, small and a little overcrowded with things that told you exactly who she was. Stacks of library books on the coffee table, a dry erase board on the kitchen wall covered in numbers that were probably someone's tax situation. A drawing Lily had made 3 years ago, a house with 4 stick figures, 2 big and 2 small, one with yellow scribble hair that was meant to be Emma, tacked to the wall next to the window with a single piece of tape that had gone brittle at the edges. He had forgotten about that drawing. He stood looking at it for a moment while Emma moved to the kitchen. "Coffee?" she asked. "Sure." She filled 2 mugs with the focus of someone who was grateful to have something mechanical to do. He set the paper bag on her kitchen table and sat down without being invited to, because he had always sat down in Emma's kitchen without being invited to, and stopping now would have meant something. She brought the mugs over and sat across from him, looked at the bag, looked at him. "Cinnamon rolls," he said unnecessarily. "I can see that. From the place on Elm." "Nathan," her voice was careful, "you don't have to—" "I know I don't have to." He wrapped both hands around his mug. "I wanted to, and I want to talk, if that's okay." She didn't say it was okay. She also didn't say it wasn't. She just sat there holding her coffee and looking at the table between them, and that was close enough. "I've been thinking," he said, "about what you said at the festival." "I told you to forget it." "I know." "I said it was a joke." "You also said, 'I think,'" he said, the same way he'd said it that night, quiet and precise. "And you're not someone who hedges when you're joking." Emma looked up at him then, and her expression was the one he'd seen in the 2 weeks since she'd walked into that festival crowd, the one where she had decided to be fine, had assembled being fine from whatever available materials she had, and was wearing it like something that almost fit. "What do you want me to say?" she asked. "What does it help for me to—" She stopped, started again. "We're friends, Nathan. 8 years. That's not nothing. And I would rather have 8 more years of what we already have than blow it up over something I shouldn't have said out loud. And if I don't want to pretend you didn't say it," she went very still. "Because I've been sitting with it for 2 weeks, he said. "And I keep trying to file it somewhere, put it away, stop thinking about it. And I can't. And I don't know entirely what that means yet. But I know that the idea of you just pulling back, making yourself smaller, acting like it never happened." He shook his head. "I can't do that. I tried and I can't." Emma put her mug down very carefully. "You can't, or you don't want to?" "Both," he said. "Maybe the same thing." She was quiet for a long time. Outside, someone was mowing a lawn. The sound of it was very ordinary against the specific weight of sitting in Emma's kitchen trying to say true things. "I'm not asking you to make any decisions right now," he said finally. "I'm not asking you for anything except— don't disappear. Don't do that thing where you take up less space so everyone else is more comfortable. Not with me. Not with Lily." He paused. "She noticed, by the way. Asked me at breakfast why you seemed sad." Emma closed her eyes briefly. "You should have called ahead. I would have—" "I know you would have. That's why I didn't call." She opened her eyes and looked at him, and for the first time since the festival, the assembled version of fine slipped just slightly. A fracture in the surface, barely visible, but there. "This is really inconvenient," she said quietly. He almost laughed. It came out wrong, more exhale than laugh, but it was real. "Yeah, I know. 8 years, Nathan. We built something really solid. I know that too. And feelings are, she pressed two fingers to her forehead. They're messy. They don't have good timing. They don't care about what's already been built. No, he agreed. They don't. They sat with that for a moment. I'm not disappearing, Emma said finally. It wasn't quite a concession and wasn't quite a promise. It was something smaller and more honest than either. The kind of thing you said when you couldn't offer more, but you weren't willing to offer nothing. I just needed some space to be embarrassed. You don't have to be embarrassed. Easy for you to say. There was an edge in it, but a tired one. You didn't just accidentally tell your best friend you want to marry him at a public festival. It was a little bit that. She almost smiled. Almost. He almost smiled back. A little bit. They drank their coffee. He opened the bag and pushed it toward her, and she took a cinnamon roll without ceremony and pulled a piece off and ate it the same way she always ate them. Systematically, from the outside spiral working in. And something in his chest loosened by a degree that was small, but measurable. They didn't solve anything that morning. He didn't declare anything, and she didn't ask him to. He stayed for an hour, and they talked about Lily's school project and a plumbing issue Emma had been fighting with her landlord about, and a documentary she'd watched that she thought he'd find interesting. And by the time he left the apartment, there was no resolution and no definition and no clear answer to any of the things that had been unsaid for 8 years and then partially said at a spring festival by accident. But she wasn't disappearing. She had said so. He decided that was enough for now. He was wrong about that, as it turned out. But he wouldn't know that for another 3 weeks, because Emma Brooks was very good at keeping promises about the things she said out loud, and very good at quietly breaking the ones she kept only to herself. The calls came back, the texts came back, Sunday breakfast came back, Lily delighted in asking no follow-up questions with the diplomatic restraint of a 7-year-old who had somehow intuited that some things worked better if you didn't poke them. Emma came back to the edges of their life, and she was warm and present and exactly the same as she had always been. And Nathan watched her be exactly the same and understood, slowly and with a particular kind of ache, that she had made a decision he hadn't agreed to. She had decided to absorb it, pack it away, maintain what already existed and ask for nothing more. He saw it most clearly about 2.5 weeks after his visit to her apartment, at an event he hadn't expected to find clarifying. The Clover Ridge Public Library had been running a community renovation project for the past 3 months. Volunteers coming in on weekends to repaint, repair shelving, update the reading rooms. Emma had been organizing it since January, which was the kind of thing Emma did without being asked and without making it a personality. Nathan had donated money to the project early on, which was the kind of thing he could do in under 5 minutes, and which required no further involvement. But Emma had called him 2 months ago and said they need extra hands this Saturday. You own a construction company, I'm just saying. And he had shown up with 2 of his guys and a truck full of supplies, and now it had somehow become a monthly thing. He arrived that Saturday morning to find Emma already there. She was always already there, directing a small group of volunteers with a clipboard she'd been carrying around since February that had seen better days. The library's main room was a mix of old and almost finished, fresh cream paint on the east wall, scaffolding near the high windows, new shelving units leaning in their flat-pack boxes against the far side. Emma saw him come in and gave him the same nod she'd been giving him for weeks. Warm, easy, present, contained, and pointed him toward the back storeroom where there were more boxes to move. He moved boxes. It was fine. Everything was fine, which was exactly the problem. An hour in, one of the older volunteers, a retired teacher named Helen Marsh, who had been coming to the library since it opened in 1987 and who treated the renovation like a personal mission, appeared at the door of the storeroom carrying a cardboard box with a strip of masking tape on the lid that read, "Old Photos, Community Events." Emma said you might want to look through these, Helen said. Some of them go back 15 years or more. We're thinking a display wall. Community history, sort of thing. Nathan took the box. He carried it to one of the reading tables in the side room where the light was better and opened it, expecting the kind of miscellaneous institutional photographs that ended up in library storage, ribbon cuttings, author visits, summer reading program posters. Instead, he found 8 years of his own life laid out in faded 4x6s and printed digital photos, slightly out of focus, some of them labeled on the back in different handwriting. The library had photographed community events, charity drives, the annual book fair, the kids' reading festival they'd hosted 4 years ago that Lily had attended, the neighborhood cleanup project from the spring 2 years back. And Emma had organized most of those events, which meant Emma was in most of those photographs. And because Emma had organized them, and because Nathan had always shown up when Emma organized things, Nathan was in most of those photographs too. He sat with the box for longer than he'd intended. There was a photograph from 6 years ago, the library's 20th anniversary charity auction, in which Nathan was standing at the bidding table with his arm loosely around Emma's shoulders, not romantically, just the easy physical shorthand of two people who were comfortable with each other. They were both laughing at something out of frame. He looked happy. He looked actually, genuinely happy, in a way that he had spent 6 years since his divorce telling himself he didn't miss. There was one from 4 years ago, the winter after Lily's mother had officially moved to Seattle, and Lily had gone through 3 weeks of nightmares and wouldn't sleep in her own bed. The library had hosted a children's holiday party, and Emma had taken Lily herself because Nathan had a work emergency and couldn't leave the site. In the photograph, Lily was sitting in Emma's lap with a paper crown on her head and both arms wrapped around Emma's neck. And Emma was looking not at the camera, but down at Lily, with an expression that Nathan sat and looked at for a long time. It wasn't the expression of a babysitter. It wasn't the expression of a good friend doing a favor. He kept going through the box. Birthdays he barely remembered being at. A neighborhood block party 3 summers ago where he'd apparently spent an hour teaching Emma's neighbor's kid how to throw a frisbee while Emma stood nearby with 2 cans of soda, waiting. A spring festival, not this year's, 2 years ago, in which he and Emma were seated at the same bench they'd been at 2 weeks ago, close enough that their shoulders were touching, and neither of them appeared to notice. He looked up from the photograph and stared at the wall of the side room, and did the specific kind of arithmetic that felt more like an accounting of stupidity than anything else. 8 years. Hundreds of moments, thousands of small choices she had made to show up, to stay, to fold herself into the fabric of his and Lily's life with a consistency that he had cataloged as friendship, and nothing more, because it was easier than examining what it actually was. The question that came to him, sitting in the library side room with a cardboard box full of photographic evidence on the table, was not, does Emma love us? That answer was right there in every image. The question was why he had spent 8 years accepting something that looked exactly like what he claimed not to be looking for, and calling it by a different name. He knew why. He just hadn't made himself say it plainly. His marriage ending had not broken him. He'd refused to use that word, found it dramatic, found it self-indulgent. But it had done something to his relationship with his own judgment. If he had chosen wrong that first time, if he had been that certain and been that incorrect, then the answer was not to try again more carefully, but to not try in the same direction at all. Keep the love where it already lived, in Lily, in the work, in the friendships that were already defined and therefore couldn't ambush him. Emma had been the primary beneficiary and the primary victim of that logic, and she'd had no idea because he'd never told her, because the logic was embarrassing even inside his own head. He sat with the box until Emma appeared in the doorway. "Helen said you were back here," she said. Then she saw his expression. "What?" He held up the photograph from the library anniversary, the one from 6 years ago. She crossed the room and took it, and stood there looking at it, and something in her face did the thing, the fracture, that he'd seen in her kitchen 3 weeks ago. "I didn't know they had these," she said. "There's a lot of them." She handed it back. "We should use them for the display wall." That's what Helen wanted. "Emma." "It's a good photo. The lighting's decent for a library event." "Emma." He said it the same way his mother had said his name. 2 syllables, containing something larger. She stopped talking. He looked at her. She was standing 3 feet away in her renovation clothes, old jeans, a paint-stained flannel she'd had since the first year they met. And she was doing it again, the thing he'd asked her not to do. Assembling the acceptable version of herself, the low-maintenance version, the one who asked for nothing and therefore could not be refused. "I've been going through these for 40 minutes, he said. "And I have a question." She waited. She was very good at waiting. "Were you ever going to say anything?" he asked. "If I hadn't made that stupid joke at the festival? If you hadn't slipped up, were you ever going to? No, she said, simply, immediately, without drama. No, I wasn't. Why? She looked at the box of photographs rather than at him. Because you had enough to deal with. Because Lily needed stable, and I was stable, and that was more important. Because... She exhaled slowly. Because I knew what your marriage did to you, and I wasn't going to be the thing that complicated what we already had. You decided that for both of us. I decided it for all three of us. The weight of that sat between them. Not comfortable, not clean, but real. The realest thing that had been said between them since the festival. Maybe more real than that, because this wasn't accidental. Emma was saying it on purpose, looking at him now, directly. I love your daughter, she said. I have loved your daughter since she was 3 years old and used to fall asleep in the car on the way home from the diner, and you'd carry her in still in her coat. That has never had conditions on it. Whatever happens between you and me, she gestured in a way that encompassed the space between them and all of its complications. That's separate. That doesn't change. I know that. I need you to really know that, because if this gets messy, and it will get messy, that's just how people are, Lily doesn't pay for it. I know, he said again, and this time it landed differently, because he was hearing it differently, not as a caveat, as a declaration, as Emma being, even now, even in this moment, which was primarily about the two of them, primarily concerned with his daughter. He put the photograph down on the table. He looked at Emma Brooks standing in the library side room in her paint-stained flannel with the afternoon light coming through the high window behind her, and he thought, there it is. There's the thing I've been calling something else for 8 years. He didn't say that out loud. It wasn't the right moment for it. He knew the right moment hadn't arrived yet, could feel the shape of it somewhere ahead of them. Not here, not in a dusty library side room with Helen probably wondering where they both were. There were things he still needed to sit with, things he needed to be honest about with himself before he could be honest about them with her. But he picked up the photograph again and handed it back to Emma and said, "Put it in the display. It's a good photo." And the way she took it from him, fingers brushing his briefly, neither of them making a point of it, felt like something shifting, not resolving, not finishing, shifting. Emma went back to her clipboard and her volunteers and her renovation project, and Nathan went back to moving boxes, and the afternoon went on the way afternoons did in Clover Ridge. Ordinary, slightly loud, smelling like fresh paint and old wood. But something had changed in the accounting of things. He couldn't have said exactly what, only that the photographs were now going on a display wall, and that Emma's face in the picture from 6 years ago was going to be visible to everyone who walked into the library, and that somehow that felt important in a way he hadn't finished understanding. He stayed until 6, helped carry the last of the flat-pack boxes to the dumpster, washed paint off his forearms at the utility sink while Emma locked the supply closet and checked things off her clipboard with the focused efficiency of someone who needed to finish tasks to feel okay. On his way out, he stopped at the door and turned back. "Hey," he said. She looked up. "Thank you," he said, "for the library thing, for all of it." She tilted her head slightly. "You've been coming every month." "Not what I meant," he said. "A beat, too." "I know," she said softly. He nodded once. She nodded once. It was not enough, and it was also, somehow, exactly enough for right now. He walked to his truck in the early evening air, and he didn't have a plan yet, but he had something he hadn't had 3 weeks ago. A clear, unambiguous understanding of what was actually at stake and what he was actually afraid of, which was not the same thing as knowing what to do, but was at least an honest starting point. Lily was with his mother tonight. He drove home alone, made himself a sandwich he ate standing over the kitchen sink, and then sat at the kitchen table for a long time, with nothing in front of him except the specific feeling of a man who had finally, belatedly, stopped lying to himself about what he wanted. It wasn't a comfortable feeling. It felt, in fact, a great deal like the moment before something broke open, which, as it turned out, was exactly what it was. He spent 3 days working up to it, which he would not have admitted to anyone. Not because he was ashamed of taking 3 days. He'd spent 8 years not doing this, so 3 days was arguably efficient. but because the specific texture of those 3 days was not flattering. He was restless in a way that had no productive outlet. He sat in meetings and followed the thread of what people were saying and made the right sounds at the right times. And somewhere underneath all of it, he was running the same loop. What to say? How to say it? Whether this was the right decision or the kind of decision that felt right because he was lonely and had spent 40 minutes looking at old photographs. He kept coming back to Emma's face in that photograph. The one from the holiday party 4 years ago. Lily in her lap, paper crown, both arms around Emma's neck. Emma looking down at his daughter with an expression that had no performance in it, nothing shaped for an audience, nothing assembled for the occasion. Just a woman who loved a kid and wasn't trying to hide it or leverage it or make it mean anything except what it was. He had looked at a lot of people in his life through the lens of what they wanted from him. It was an occupational hazard when you had money. Everyone wanted something, even the ones who claimed not to, even the ones who were genuine in their affection. There was always a texture to it, some underlying current of need or ambition, or at least the awareness of his position that colored the way people moved around him. Emma had never once felt like that. He understood, sitting at his kitchen table on the third night, that what he'd been cataloging as comfortable friendship was actually something rarer and more specific. He trusted her, not as a concept, not as an evaluation, in the involuntary animal bone-deep way that you trusted the ground to hold you. He had trusted Emma Brooks since roughly the 4th month of knowing her and had never examined it because it had never felt fragile enough to require examination. It felt fragile now. But that was his fault, not hers, and he was done letting his fear write the narrative. He went to the bakery on Elm Street in the morning and bought cinnamon rolls for the 2nd time in a month, and the woman behind the counter handed him the bag and said, "Same as last time?" And he said yes, and she said, "She must really like these." And he said, "Yeah," and didn't elaborate and walked out. He called Emma on his way to her apartment. She picked up on the 2nd ring. "Hey." "Hey. Are you home?" A short pause. "Yeah. Why?" "I'm coming over." Another pause. "Nathan, it's 8:30 in the morning." "I know. Are you busy?" "I have work at 10. That gives us an hour." She was quiet for a moment. He could hear her thinking. Emma thought loudly. Not in words, just in the quality of her silences, which had different textures for different states of mind. This one was wary, and also, underneath the wary, something that wasn't quite hoping but was adjacent to it. "Okay," she said. He knocked on her door 7 minutes later. She opened it already dressed. Dark jeans, a green blouse, hair down, and she looked at the bag in his hand and said, "Again with the cinnamon rolls. They're a good opener. They're a bribe." "They're both things," he said. She let him in. Same apartment, same organized clutter, same Lily drawing on the wall with its brittle tape. He noticed she'd moved a stack of books off the kitchen table since last time, which meant she'd been cleaning, which meant she'd known this was coming even if she hadn't known exactly when. He sat down. She sat across from him. He put the bag on the table and didn't open it. "I've been thinking," he said, "about what you said at the library." "I said a lot of things at the library. About deciding things for all 3 of us." He kept his eyes on the table for a moment, then looked up at her. "You did that. You made a call 8 years ago, or sometime in those 8 years, and you decided what I could handle and what Lily needed and what was worth saying out loud, and you built a whole structure around that decision and just lived inside it." Emma said nothing. She had her hands folded on the table in front of her, very still. "And I understand why," he said. "I'm not saying it was wrong. Given everything, given what I was like after the divorce, given that I was basically walking around with caution tape over the parts of myself I didn't want touched, I understand why you made that call. I probably would have done the same thing." "Nathan, let me finish." He said it gently. She closed her mouth. "I've been sitting with something for 3 weeks, and I haven't said it out loud yet because I needed to be sure I wasn't just reacting. I needed to know I wasn't doing this because of the photograph thing, or because I was lonely, or because you said something that caught me off guard and I got caught up in the feeling of it." She was watching him now with an expression that was careful and very quiet, the way she looked when she was trying not to want something too much. "I'm sure," he said. 2 words. Small, as declarations went. He had considered and rejected a dozen more elaborate formulations over the past 3 days, and they had all felt like noise around something that was actually simple. Emma pressed her lips together. A muscle in her jaw moved. I have been... He stopped. Tried again. I have been afraid of this for a long time. Not of you, specifically. Of what it means to want something like this again. After the divorce, I told myself I was protecting Lily. That stability was the priority, and that bringing anything romantic into our life was a risk I couldn't justify. And I believed that, I really did. But somewhere in the past 3 weeks, I had to be honest with myself about what I was actually protecting, and it wasn't Lily. He exhaled. It was me. Emma hadn't moved. She's fine, he said. Lily has been fine. She has me, and she has my mother, and she has her school, and her friends, and she has you. And she's been fine. My fear was mine, not hers. I was using her as a reason to not risk anything, and that's... He shook his head. That's not who I want to be. The kitchen was very quiet. Somewhere outside, a car passed. Say something, he said. Emma took a breath. Slow and deliberate, the way she breathed when she was managing something that was trying to move faster than she wanted it to. How long have you been afraid? She asked. Since the divorce. Longer than that, she said. Not accusatory, just accurate. He thought about it. Yeah, longer than that. Your marriage ending. That wasn't the beginning of it, was it? You picked someone you already knew it was safe to be disappointed by, because you already didn't quite believe you'd gotten it right. He stared at her. She pressed a hand flat against the table. I'm not saying that to be cruel. I'm saying it because I've known you for 8 years, and I've watched you, and you make very good decisions about almost everything. Your business, your daughter, your friendships, but you've always kept one hand on the exit when it comes to your own heart, like you're already factoring in the failure before the thing has even started. The accuracy of it landed with a weight he hadn't expected, not because it was new information somewhere below the surface, he had known this, but because no one had ever said it to him plainly. Even his mother, who was perceptive about most things, had approached it obliquely. Emma said hard things the way she did most things, directly, without dramatics, and then she sat quietly while you absorbed it. Yeah, he said finally. That's probably right. So what's different now? You, he said. You're different, or not different. He rubbed the back of his neck, the gesture he made when words weren't cooperating. I've been running the failure calculation on this for years. What happens if it doesn't work? What we lose? How awkward it becomes? How Lily gets caught in the middle of it? How I damage the one friendship in my life that has never asked anything complicated of me? He looked at her directly. And I finally asked myself what happens if I don't try. And I couldn't. There was nothing on that side, just more years of the same thing, except now I know what I know, and I'm choosing not to act on it. And I can't do that. Emma's eyes had gone bright in a way she was clearly fighting. She wasn't a crier, had cried exactly twice in his presence in 8 years, both times at things that would have made anyone cry. And the fact that she was working this hard to hold it together told him more than any word she could have offered. I hid it for a long time, she said. Her voice was steady but thin. I was really careful. I thought I was being smart. You were protecting something. I was protecting myself, she said. Don't give me too much credit. I was protecting the thing I already had because I was terrified of asking for more and watching it disappear. She looked at the table. Your daughter calls me on the phone when she's scared. Do you know what that means to me? I grew up with nothing that felt like... She stopped, reorganized. I didn't have a lot of stability when I was young. Moving around, different situations, people who were there and then weren't. What you and Lily gave me, the constancy of it, I would have rather had that for the rest of my life than gamble on something more and lose it. This was more than she usually said about her childhood. She offered it in pieces, rarely, and he had always accepted what she gave and not pushed for more. He didn't push now. I know, he said. I kept telling myself that what we had was enough. She finally looked up at him. It was enough. It was more than I'd ever expected to have. So I just stayed. inside the boundaries of what was already defined. And when I said what I said at the festival, I was so angry at myself because it wasn't supposed to come out. It wasn't supposed to become your problem. It's not a problem. Nathan, I'm not being polite. It is not a problem. He leaned forward slightly. Emma, I drove here at 8:30 in the morning with cinnamon rolls because I didn't want to wait any longer to tell you that I'm not interested in maintaining appropriate distance from the person who has been the most consistent thing in my life for 8 years. She made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sob. That's a terrible way to say it. I know. I had something better planned, but it fell apart on the drive over. What happened to it? Got nervous? She did laugh at that. Brief, real, slightly undone. You got nervous. Terrifyingly nervous. Still am. He turned his hands palm up on the table, which was less a gesture and more an admission. I don't know how to do this, Em. I want to be honest about that. I know how to run a company and raise a kid and fix a project that's going sideways, but this specific thing... He shook his head. I'm going to do it wrong sometimes. Everyone does it wrong sometimes. I might do it wrong a lot. Nathan. She said his name the way he'd said hers, quietly, with everything underneath it. I have been watching you for 8 years. I know exactly who you are. I'm not asking for perfect. What are you asking for? She was quiet for a moment. The honest kind of quiet, not the assembled kind. Don't pretend, she said finally. Whatever happens. Don't do the thing where you decide what I can handle and act accordingly. Just say the real thing, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's messy. She looked at him. Can you do that? I'm doing it right now. This is the easy part. He considered that. Is it? Relatively speaking, the ghost of a smile. We haven't tried to actually be something yet. We haven't gotten on each other's nerves in that particular way. We haven't had the argument about something stupid at 10 o'clock at night when you're tired and I'm stressed and neither of us is our best self. We've argued before. Not about us. About us is different. He nodded slowly. I know. And Lily is my responsibility, he said, not yours to manage around. If we do this, we do it honestly, including with her. We don't hide it, and we don't perform it, and we don't ask her to carry anything. If something changes, she hears it from me. Clear? Emma's expression did something complicated. The way she was looking at him had shifted. Less guarded, less careful, more tired in the specific way of someone who had been holding something heavy for a long time and was deciding whether to set it down. Clear, she said softly. Okay. He opened the paper bag and pushed the cinnamon rolls toward her. Then here's what I want to say. No more pretending, no more deciding what the other person can handle, no more hiding behind the friendship as an excuse not to say the true thing. She pulled a roll from the bag, didn't eat it, just held it. That sounds like a promise. It is a promise. A simple one. The only kind I can make right now. He met her eyes. I'm not going to stand here and tell you what everything looks like in 5 years. I don't know. But I know what's real right now, and I know that I am done acting like it isn't. Emma sat with that. Outside the window of her apartment, Clover Ridge was doing what it did on Saturday mornings. Unhurried, ordinary, not particularly concerned with the weight of what was happening in a second-floor kitchen on Caldwell Street. The neighbor's lawnmower had started up again somewhere below. A kid on a bike went past, life proceeding at its normal pace, indifferent to the specific difficulty of two people trying to be honest with each other after years of being careful. Okay, Emma said, finally. Just that. The same 2 syllables he'd used. Small, unadorned, carrying more than it looked like it should. Okay, he said back. They didn't hug. They didn't reach across the table. It wasn't that kind of moment. It was more tentative than that, more aware of its own fragility, more honest about the fact that what had just happened was a beginning, and beginnings were inherently unstable things. You didn't celebrate them, you just tried not to break them. Emma ate her cinnamon roll the way she always ate them, spiral working inward. Nathan ate his without really tasting it. They talked, haltingly at first, then with something approaching their normal rhythm, about what this actually looked like. Nothing dramatic. Questions that were practical and revealing in equal measure. Whether they told Lily together, or Nathan told her first. Whether they kept things quiet while they figured out the shape of it, or whether Clover Ridge could just find out organically the way Clover Ridge found out everything. "It'll get weird," Emma said. "Publicly. People will have opinions." "People already have opinions? Mrs. Farrell at the hardware store told me 3 years ago that we were wasting time." Emma blinked. 3 years ago? She was very direct about it. "What did you say?" "I said we were just friends." "And?" "She said—" He stopped. "What did she say, Nathan?" He had the particular expression of a man who had just realized the anecdote was not going to support the position he'd been holding for 3 years. "She said that was the saddest thing she'd heard all week." Emma pressed her lips together, but the laugh got out anyway. Not polished, not pretty, just genuine and slightly startled and real, the laugh that happened when something was funny against your will. He laughed too, briefly, and it felt like something opening up, like a window in a room that had been closed too long. By the time Emma needed to leave for work, they had settled nothing and everything. No formal definition, no announced status, no plan presented to anyone. Just the agreement they'd made. No pretending, no hiding, no deciding unilaterally what the other person could handle. It was not a lot, as structures went. It was barely a framework, but it was the most honest thing that had existed between them in 8 years. And it felt, in the particular and unrepeatable way that true things felt, like solid ground. Nathan walked her out. They stood at the base of the stairs in the morning air that still had the cool edge of early spring in it, and Emma looked up at him with an expression he didn't have a previous filing for. Not the friend expression, not the guarded expression, not the assembled fine expression. Something newer. Still cautious around the edges, still a little afraid, but present in a way she hadn't let herself be present before. "Hey," he said. "Hey. I'll call you tonight." "Okay." Not a check-in, not a... He stopped, because he was about to say not a friendly call, which was both true and ridiculous. "I'll just call." "I know," she said. "I'll answer." She walked toward the corner where she caught the bus to the accounting firm, and he stood at the base of the stairs and watched her go. And it was not different from 100 other mornings he'd watched Emma walk away from him, except that it was completely different, because now he knew exactly what he was watching, and he had stopped pretending otherwise. He drove home with the radio off. He needed to talk to Lily. That was the thing sitting at the front of his mind, the thing that mattered most practically. Not because Lily would be upset, but because she deserved to hear it from him directly, and she deserved to hear it in a way that was honest without being more than a 7-year-old needed to carry. He wasn't going to walk in and announce a relationship. He was going to sit with his daughter and tell her simply that Emma mattered to him in a way he hadn't said out loud before, and that things might look a little different going forward, and that nothing about Lily's place in any of it was changing. He was still thinking about how to do that when his phone rang at 4 in the afternoon. He picked it up without looking, assuming Derek, and said, "Yeah," with the flatness of a man bracing for a construction update. "Nathan Sterling!" The voice was not Derek. It was professional and measured and faintly familiar in the way of someone whose office you'd visited once a year ago. "This is James Whitfield, Whitfield Capital." Nathan set down the folder he was holding. Whitfield Capital was a private equity firm out of San Francisco. He'd met James Whitfield at a conference the previous spring. A brief conversation, unremarkable. The kind of exchange that happened at those things where both parties were politely interested and neither expected anything to come of it. "Mr. Whitfield," he said, "what can I do for you?" "I'll be direct," Whitfield said. "We've been watching Sterling Development Group for about 18 months. Your commercial division's margins on the regional portfolio are exceptional for a company your size. And your project completion rate is something we haven't seen in this space in a long time. We have a proposal I'd like to discuss." Nathan was quiet for a moment. "What kind of proposal?" "Partnership structure with expansion capital. We're talking about the Pacific Northwest Corridor, Oregon, Washington, potentially Vancouver. We have the capital and the market access. You have the operational execution. The numbers we're looking at would triple your company's revenue within 4 years. Nathan sat back in his chair. He was aware, in the specific way you became aware of things that were going to be complicated, that this phone call had arrived on exactly this day, which was the kind of timing that was either meaningless or the universe being pointed about something. There'd need to be a relocation component, Whitfield continued. Our Pacific operations are headquartered in Seattle. We'd need the leadership team on the ground. That would include you. Seattle. We understand it's a significant ask. The terms would reflect that. Nathan said nothing for a moment. I'd like to meet in person, Whitfield said. No pressure, no commitment. Hear the full proposal. Look at the numbers. Ask whatever you need to ask. When? We'd fly you out next week if you're available. Cover everything. He said he'd check his schedule and get back to them by Monday. He hung up and set his phone on the desk and stared at it. 3 hours ago, he had sat in Emma Brooks's kitchen and made a promise about not running from things, about not letting fear write his decisions, about choosing, for once, to stay inside something real instead of protecting himself from the risk of it. And now there was Seattle on the table. He picked up his phone again. Not to call Whitfield back. To call his mother. She picked up on the third ring, and before she could say anything, he said, I need to talk. Not about the business stuff. The other thing. Margaret Sterling was quiet for exactly 1 second. Are you finally dealing with the Emma situation? I dealt with it this morning. Another pause, then very carefully. And it went okay. He leaned back. But something came up this afternoon that complicates it. What happened? He told her about Whitfield, about Seattle, about the numbers, which were real and significant, and the kind of opportunity that didn't come twice. His mother listened the way she listened, completely, without interrupting. And when he finished, there was a silence long enough that he almost thought the call had dropped. Nathan, she said finally, I know. What are you going to do? He looked at the folder on his desk, then at the window, then at the lily drawing on his refrigerator, visible from his office doorway. Another version of the same image, same 4 stick figures, same yellow scribble hair, drawn about a year after the one on Emma's wall. Lily made a lot of drawings. She distributed them throughout the lives of the people she considered hers. I don't know yet, he said. Yes, you do, his mother said. You called me because you want someone to tell you that you already know. He didn't answer that. Do you remember, Margaret said, what you told me after the divorce? You said you didn't want Lily growing up watching her father choose work over living. You said that to me. You said it was the one thing you were going to get right. This isn't just work. The numbers are, I know what the numbers are. I'm not asking about the numbers. Her voice was not unkind. It was the voice she used when she was telling him something that required him to hold still long enough to hear it. I'm asking you what you want. Not what's logical, not what makes financial sense. What do you actually want? He sat with that for a moment. The window of his office showed the edge of Clover Ridge in the late afternoon light. The top of the oak trees on Main Street, the water tower 2 blocks over with its faded lettering, the slant of spring sun on the rooftops of a town that had been his daughter's whole world and more of his own world than he usually admitted to. I want to stay, he said. The simplicity of it surprised him slightly, the way true things sometimes did. Then stay, his mother said, simply, as if it were that uncomplicated. I have to actually think about it. You just thought about it. Margaret, call Emma, she said. Tell her about the offer. See what she says. I just told her I wasn't going to decide things for her. I'm not going to reverse that in the same afternoon. I didn't say decide for her. I said tell her. There's a difference. A pause. That's what it looks like, not hiding things. You said that's what you wanted. He was quiet. I'll call you tomorrow, his mother said, and hung up. Nathan set the phone down and looked at the folder from Whitfield Capital and thought about Seattle and thought about Lily and thought about Emma in her kitchen this morning saying, don't pretend. And he thought about the particular weight of a decision that looked on one axis like an obvious business choice and on another axis like the first real test of every promise he'd made today. He did not call Emma that afternoon. He called her that evening at 8:15 after Lily was in bed. He sat on the back step of his house with the phone in his hand and the early spring dark around him, smelling like wet grass and something distant and green, and when she answered, he said, "I have something I need to tell you about, and I want to be clear before I tell you that I'm not looking for advice. I said no more hiding things, and this is a thing, and so I'm telling you." Emma was quiet for a moment. "Okay," she said. "Tell me." He told her. The silence on her end when he finished was a specific kind of silence, processing, not alarmed, but careful. "That's a real opportunity," she said finally. "I know. Triple revenue in 4 years that's not a small number." "I know." Another pause. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking," he said slowly, "that I already know what I want to do. I'm just trying to figure out whether I'm making the right call for the right reasons or whether I'm making it because of something that happened this morning that I don't want to destabilize." Emma was quiet for a long moment. "Nathan," she said carefully, "I need to say something, and I need you to hear it without reading into it." "Okay. If this is the right move for your company and for Lily's future, if the numbers are real and the opportunity is legitimate, you should take it." Her voice was steady. "Whatever happened this morning, whatever we're figuring out, it is not worth more than your daughter's security. It's not worth more than the thing you've built. And I would never forgive myself if you passed on something real because of me." He leaned forward on the step, elbows on his knees. "That's a very selfless thing to say." "It's not selfless," she said, and her voice had a slight edge to it. "It's practical. I watched my mother give up 3 opportunities because of men who weren't worth it. I'm not going to be the reason you don't take your shot. I'm not built that way." He sat with that. "I hear you," he said. But I didn't say there was a but. There's always a but when someone says, "I hear you," in that tone." He almost smiled. "I'm going to think about it properly. Actually, think about it. Numbers, logistics, Lily's school, what the move actually looks like." He paused. "And then I'm going to make the right decision." "That's all I'm asking," Emma said. They talked for another hour about other things. Her work, a book Lily had left at Emma's apartment that she'd need back, the display wall at the library that was going up next weekend. Normal things, the kind of things they'd always talked about. But underneath all of it was the new shape of them, the thing that had been named today, still fragile and new and slightly terrifying. When they hung up, Nathan sat on the step for another 20 minutes in the dark. He thought about Seattle. He thought about the numbers. He thought about his daughter sleeping inside and the life they had built in this town, and the woman he'd spent all morning being honest with for the first time. He thought about what his mother had said. You just thought about it. He went inside and locked the door and went to check on Lily the way he did every night. Just the door cracked, just long enough to hear her breathing, just the reassurance that she was there and fine and his. And stood in the hallway afterward with his hand still on the doorframe. He wasn't ready to call Whitfield back yet, but he was getting closer to knowing what he was going to say. He flew to Seattle on a Wednesday. He hadn't told Emma he was going until the night before, which wasn't hiding. He'd been clear with her about the meeting, had mentioned Whitfield twice in the week since the phone call. But something about saying "I leave tomorrow morning" made it concrete in a way the abstract discussion of the opportunity hadn't been. And he watched her face do the careful thing when he told her, the assembling thing, and then watched her dismantle it deliberately because they'd both agreed to stop doing that. "How long?" she asked. 2 nights. Back Friday afternoon. She nodded. They were at his kitchen table after dinner, Lily already in bed, dishes already done, the particular quiet of a weeknight when the day had finished but sleep hadn't arrived yet. Emma had been coming to dinner more often in the 2 weeks since his kitchen visit. Not every night, not in a way that had been discussed or defined, just more often, which was its own definition. "Are you nervous?" she asked. "About the meeting?" "About all of it." He thought about that honestly. "No, which is maybe the thing I should pay attention to." She looked at him over her coffee mug. "What do you mean?" "I mean I've been trying to talk myself into being more uncertain than I am. Running the numbers again, looking at the logistics again, trying to find a version of this where the answer isn't obvious." He turned his own mug in his hands. "And I keep coming back to the same place." "Which is?" "That it's a very good opportunity for a life I don't actually want. Emma set her mug down. She didn't say anything for a moment, and when she did speak, her voice was precise in the way it got when she was being deliberately careful. You need to separate that from what happened 2 weeks ago. You know that, right? I'm trying to. Because making a decision like this based on something that's still new and uncertain and hasn't been tested yet, that's not smart, Nathan. That's not the way you make decisions. I know how I make decisions. Then use that. Actually run it properly. Don't skip the part where you seriously consider taking it just because it feels easier to stay. He looked at her. She was being fair, and it was slightly irritating, which was also a new thing. Being slightly irritated with Emma in a way that had nothing to do with a construction disagreement or a difference of opinion about how to handle some neighborhood committee meeting. A real, personal, low-grade irritation at being told something true he didn't want to hear. He filed that away as information. I will run it properly, he said. That's why I'm going. She picked her mug back up. Good. They sat in the particular silence of two people who were figuring out what their silences meant now. Different from the old silences. Those had been easy, unexamined, the silences of two people who had run out of things to say but didn't need to say anything. These were more alert, more aware of themselves. I'll call when I land, he said. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. A pause. The ghost of a smile crossed her face. Okay. He flew out at 7 the next morning. The Whitfield Capital offices were in a building in downtown Seattle with views of the Sound that were genuinely impressive and clearly intended to be genuinely impressive. And James Whitfield was a man of about 60 who had the particular confidence of someone who had spent 4 decades getting what he wanted through a combination of intelligence and patience. He wasn't aggressive. He wasn't flashy. He was the kind of man who made you feel, in the first 15 minutes of knowing him, that he had already assessed you completely and found you adequate, which was its own form of pressure. The meeting lasted 4 hours. The numbers were real. That was the first thing Nathan confirmed with the kind of systematic attention he brought to any deal he was evaluating. Not assuming, not accepting Whitfield's framing, going through the actual figures with the analysts they brought in, and asking the questions that made the analyst look slightly startled, which was either a good sign about the numbers or a bad one about the analyst. By the end of the second hour, he had satisfied himself that what was on the table was legitimate. The scope of it was significant. Not life-changing in the abstract way people use that phrase, but concretely, practically significant. The expansion capital would allow Sterling Development to enter markets Nathan had been watching for 3 years and couldn't access at his current scale. The Pacific Northwest Corridor was exactly the kind of regional play he would have designed himself if he'd had the capital. The partnership structure gave him operational control with Whitfield's network and resources behind it. It was, from a purely professional standpoint, close to the best offer he had ever received. Whitfield walked him through the relocation package over lunch at a restaurant with the kind of quiet that money bought. No crowds, no noise, just the muted clink of good silverware and the view of the water beyond the windows. Temporary housing for the first 6 months, a school placement service for Lily, a relocation allowance that was frankly excessive. We want this to be frictionless, Whitfield said. The transition, the adjustment. We understand you have a child. I do. Good schools in the area, safe neighborhoods, and Seattle has its own character. Different from a smaller town, obviously, but a lot of families find it suits them better once they've made the adjustment. Nathan looked at the water. Seattle was not an unattractive city. It was gray in the way cities by the water were gray, and the scale of it was different from Clover Ridge in a way that was neither bad nor good, just different. He could imagine Lily here. He could imagine building something real here. He could also imagine, with equally clear resolution, what wasn't here. Can I ask you something personal? Nathan said. Whitfield tilted his head slightly. You can ask. You've lived in Seattle your whole career? Moved here in 1989, haven't left. Your family is here. Wife, 2 sons, 4 grandchildren, all within 20 minutes. Nathan nodded. Why here specifically? Not the business reason, the real reason. Whitfield was quiet for a moment in a way that suggested he hadn't been asked that question recently, or possibly ever, in a professional context. He looked at his water glass and then at the view. My wife's family was here, he said. Her parents, her sister. When we were deciding where to land, I had opportunities in New York, Chicago. I turned down a good one in London. She said she wanted to be near her family. I said, okay. He paused. At the time, I thought I was making a compromise. Looking back, it was the best decision I ever made. Not for the business, for everything else that matters. He looked back at Nathan. I'm telling you that unsolicited, which isn't characteristic of me. Nathan said, I appreciate it. Whitfield picked up his fork. The offer is real. Take the time you need, but not too much time. We have other partners we're considering, and the window for this particular structure is not unlimited. Understood, Nathan said. He called Emma from the hotel that night, sitting at the desk in his room with the city lights spreading across the window behind him. She picked up on the second ring, which she'd been doing consistently since their conversation in her kitchen, not performing availability, just actually being available, which was a distinction that mattered. How was the meeting? The offer is legitimate, he said. Numbers are real, structure is sound. Whitfield knows what he's doing. Okay. The relocation package is comprehensive. School placement, housing, the whole thing. They've clearly done this before. Okay? A pause. What aren't you saying? He leaned back in the chair. I had lunch with Whitfield, and he told me, unprompted, that moving to Seattle for his wife's family was the best decision he ever made. Not for his career, for everything else. Emma was quiet. I don't know what to do with that, he said, whether it's useful information or just an anecdote. What's your gut? My gut has been telling me the same thing since the first phone call. I'm trying to decide whether to trust it. Why wouldn't you trust it? Because it's convenient, he said. Tells me exactly what I want to hear, which makes me suspicious of it. Emma made a sound that was somewhere between a sigh and a laugh. Nathan, you've built a company worth more than most people in this town will see in their lifetimes by trusting your gut on construction deals and market timing and personnel decisions. You fire your gut when it's about your own life? That's different. How? He didn't have an answer for that held up under examination, and they both knew it. Go to sleep, Emma said. Look at everything again in the morning when you're not in a hotel room in a city you're trying to decide if you want to live in. Call me when you land Friday. I'll call you tomorrow night, too. A pause. Okay, she said, and the way she said it was small and real and made the hotel room feel very far from everything. He did look at everything again in the morning. Went through the numbers one more time on his laptop over coffee he made badly in the hotel room machine. Opened the projections, the market data, the partnership terms. Looked at it with the same eyes he used when he was evaluating a major acquisition or deciding whether to take on a project that stretched his current capacity. And when he finished, what he had was this: a genuinely excellent opportunity, clearly delineated, offering more than most people in his industry would encounter in a lifetime of building, and the absolute bedrock certainty that he was not going to take it. Not because of Emma, or not only because of Emma. That had been his mother's first instinct, the romantic logic, the sentimental version of the decision, and he'd been resisting it because he needed to understand his own reasoning before he could trust it. What he understood, sitting in a Seattle hotel room with his cold second cup of hotel coffee and the sound of the city outside, was something more structural than sentiment. Lily's whole world was in Clover Ridge, her school, her friends, the woman she called on the phone when she was scared, her grandmother 20 minutes away, the library where she went to summer reading programs, the spring festival where she got her face painted and ate cotton candy and ran around with Sophie, whose butterfly design she'd coveted for 3 years. Lily had lost one parent to a relocation. Her mother's move to the Pacific Northwest had redrawn the geography of her life in ways that she was still, at 7, quietly reckoning with. To ask her to relocate to the same coast, into the same unfamiliar city, to rebuild everything she knew from scratch. Nathan could dress that in relocation packages and school placement services, and they would not change what it actually was. His daughter was 7 years old, and she had a best friend named Sophie, and she knew where her grandmother kept the good cookies, and she knew the name of the cook at the diner who made her bear pancakes. Those things were not small. They were, in point of fact, everything. And separately from Lily, he had a company that was doing genuinely well. Not Whitfield Capital well, not Pacific Northwest Corridor well, but well. He had employees he trusted and a project pipeline he'd built carefully and a market he understood. He had built Sterling Development Group in Clover Ridge, and it was good work, and he was proud of it. And the only thing wrong with it, by James Whitfield's accounting, was that it wasn't bigger. Bigger was not, he decided on Thursday morning in Seattle, a problem he needed to solve. He emailed Whitfield's office to schedule a brief call before his Friday flight home. Whitfield himself picked up, which suggested he'd been paying attention. "Nathan," he said. "I've made a decision," Nathan said, "and I want to thank you for the offer. Genuinely. It's the best I've received and it's real, and the team you have is impressive, but I'm going to decline." A short pause. "Can I ask why?" "My daughter's life is in Clover Ridge. My company's roots are in Clover Ridge, and I've just—" He stopped, then decided to finish the sentence honestly because Whitfield had earned honest. "I've just started something there that I'm not willing to relocate." Another pause. Then Whitfield said, "The business or the personal?" "Both." A brief silence that had a different texture from the professional ones, something more human in it. "I respect that," Whitfield said, and Nathan believed him. "If your situation changes, the door isn't closed." "I appreciate that." "Build something good, Sterling." "That's the plan," Nathan said. He hung up and sat with the phone in his hand for a moment. He had expected to feel something large, or relief, or doubt, or the particular vertigo of a major decision, but what he felt was mostly the uncomplicated steadiness of having done the right thing for the right reasons, which was a feeling he associated with his best professional decisions and was mildly surprised to find available in his personal life. He texted Emma, declined the offer. "Flying home tomorrow. Can we talk?" Her response came back in under a minute. "I know. Call me when you land." He stared at the screen. "You know? I've known you for 8 years. He put the phone down and looked at the ceiling of the hotel room and thought that this was, in some specific and irreducible way, exactly the point. He landed in Clover Ridge on Friday afternoon to weather that couldn't decide if it was still winter or tentatively spring, gray sky, intermittent thin sunlight, the kind of temperature that made you leave your jacket on, but then regret it an hour later. He drove home, dropped his bag, checked in with his mother, who had Lily for the afternoon, and then drove to Emma's apartment because he'd said he would, and he was trying to be the kind of person who did what he said. She opened the door before he knocked. She'd heard the truck, probably. Her window faced the street. "Hi," she said. "Hi." She stepped back and he came in, and they stood in her kitchen, which was becoming, he realized, the primary venue of every important conversation in his life. And Emma looked at him with an expression that was open in a way he was still adjusting to. The way she'd been looking at him since the morning 2 weeks ago, when they'd agreed to stop hiding. "You actually declined it," she said. "I did." "Nathan, that was a lot of money." "I have enough money." She looked at him. "That's easy to say." "It's also true." He crossed his arms, not defensively, just because that was where his hands went when he was making a case. "I went through it properly, Em. The way I go through every decision. Not impulsively, not sentimentally. I looked at the real numbers. I looked at the market. I looked at what it would take and what it would cost, and I declined it because it wasn't the right move for me or for Lily at this point in our lives. The new thing between us is not why I declined it." She studied him. "But it's part of why." "It's part of the context," he said, "not the reason." "Explain the difference to me." He thought about how to say it. "The context is that I've been re-examining things. What matters, what I'm actually building toward, what I want the next 10 years to look like for me and Lily. That re-examination didn't start when you said what you said at the festival. It was already happening. You made it impossible to keep avoiding the conclusions." Emma leaned against the kitchen counter. Her arms were loosely crossed, her head tilted slightly to one side in the listening posture that was specific to her. "What conclusions?" "That I've been building a very good company and a pretty good life, and I've been doing both of them slightly sideways, not fully committed to either because committing fully means it can be taken away fully, and somewhere in the back of my head I've been hedging against that." He looked at her directly. "I don't want to do that anymore. And staying, Declining Seattle and staying in Clover Ridge and growing the company from here, and he gestured between them. All of it. That's not the hedge. That's the actual thing. Emma was quiet for a long moment. You know what the stupid part is? She said. Her voice had gone slightly uneven at the edges. Not quite breaking, but not as composed as she'd been holding it. I told you to take it when you called from Seattle. I told you if it was the right move for your company and for Lily's future, you should take it. I know you did. I meant it. I know you meant it. And you declined it anyway. Yes. Without asking me. You told me not to make decisions based on us, he said. So I didn't. I made it based on me and Lily. Then I called to tell you. She made a sound that was difficult to categorize. Exhale, almost laugh, almost something else. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth briefly, and then lowered it, and looked at him with eyes that were bright in a way she wasn't trying to manage. That is the most Nathan Sterling thing that has ever happened. I don't know what that means. It means you found the exact technically correct version of doing the right thing while also being completely infuriating. But she was smiling. Really smiling. Not the managed one, not the fine one. The smile that had always been the true one, the one she produced when something caught her genuinely off guard in a good way, the one that reached her eyes and made her look 5 years younger. He stepped forward. It wasn't choreographed. He crossed the kitchen in 2 steps, and she didn't move away from the counter, just looked up at him with that smile still present, and something new underneath it. Not afraid, not hidden, just there. And he put his hand on the side of her face, his thumb against her cheekbone, and she let out a breath that had been held for a very long time. I've been doing this wrong, he said quietly. For a long time. We've been doing it wrong, she said, and her hand came up and covered his. He kissed her. It was not the confident, practiced kiss of a romantic lead in anything. It was slightly off-center at first, slightly uncertain, the kiss of 2 people who knew each other extremely well in every way except this one, which turned out to be both awkward and exactly right in the way that real things often were. Her hand tightened over his. He felt her exhale against him, the particular release of something that had been held too carefully for too long. They stayed like that for a moment. Then she pulled back just slightly, not away, just enough to look at him, and whatever she saw made her expression go quietly undone in the way he'd only seen once or twice in 8 years. Okay, she said softly. Okay, he said. He dropped his hand from her face. She kept hold of it briefly, then let go. They stood in her kitchen about 6 inches apart, and neither of them said anything for a moment, which was fine. Some things didn't require words immediately, and they both knew how to sit in silence without filling it. Lily doesn't know yet, he said eventually. No. How do you want to handle that? Together, I think, if that's okay. I don't want it to be a formal thing, just, I want to tell her myself, and I want you there. Emma nodded. Whenever you're ready. Are you nervous? About telling her? She considered this honestly. No. Lily's been trying to manage this situation since she was 4 years old. She's going to be insufferable about being right. He laughed. Real, unexpected, the laugh that came out when something caught him clean. She is absolutely going to hold this over both of us. She is 7. She doesn't know what holding something over someone means. She knows exactly what it means. She learned from you. Emma looked mock offended. I have never. You absolutely have. Last March. The thing with the library fundraiser. That was different. You brought it up 4 times. It was a significant oversight on 3 separate people's parts. He was still smiling. She was trying not to. The kitchen felt, for the first time since the spring festival, genuinely easy. Not managed, not careful, not assembled. Just 2 people who knew each other well enough to argue about a library fundraiser while standing 6 inches apart in the aftermath of something that had rearranged everything. He told Lily on Saturday afternoon. He'd thought about how to do it for 24 hours, taught, practiced versions in his head, found them all too elaborate, abandoned them. In the end, he sat on the floor of Lily's room where she was doing a puzzle and said, Hey, Lil, can I tell you something? She looked up from the puzzle. Am I in trouble? No. Is Emma in trouble? Nobody's in trouble. She went back to the puzzle. Okay. You know how Emma and I are friends, he said. Yeah. We're still going to be friends, but we're also... He stopped because the prepared version of this sentence was dissolving under the reality of his 7-year-old looking at him with patient, complete attention. Emma and I care about each other in a different way than we did before, like more than just friends. Lily held a puzzle piece and looked at him. We're figuring out what that means, he said. But I wanted you to know, and I wanted to know what you think about it. Lily was quiet for a moment that was surprisingly long for a 7-year-old. Then she said, Is she going to be here more? Probably, yeah. Is she going to be at breakfast on Sundays? That's up to Emma, but yeah, probably. Lily looked at her puzzle. Lily looked at Mom. Can she pick me up from school sometimes? Nathan blinked. If you want her to, and if she's not working. She usually is working. A pause. But she always makes it work. Lily fit the puzzle piece into place with a small, satisfied click. I think that's good, Daddy. He looked at his daughter. I told Sophie that Emma was basically already my mom, Lily said conversationally, as if this were information she'd been meaning to share. But Sophie said that was complicated because of the actual situation. But I think Sophie doesn't always know what she's talking about. Nathan sat on the floor of his daughter's room and felt something that didn't have a clean name. Not quite gratitude, not quite relief, not quite amazement, but the compound of all three that came from watching a 7-year-old cut directly to the truth that the adults around her had spent months getting to. Yeah, he said. Sophie doesn't always know what she's talking about. Lily looked up at him. Is Emma going to be here today? I was going to call her. Can I call her? Yeah, he said. Yeah, you can call her. Lily was already reaching for the small tablet he'd given her for video calls, the one with exactly 3 contacts, Dad, Grandma Margaret, and Emma, a configuration that had existed for 2 years and which, he now understood, had always been an accurate inventory of the people his daughter considered essential. He listened from the doorway as Lily explained to Emma, with the thorough conversational logic of a 2nd grader, that she had been correct about the situation all along and that Emma should come over because they were doing a puzzle, and it was the big one with the birds, and it was hard, and she needed help. Emma's voice came through the tablet tinny and warm. What kind of birds? All of them, Lily said, with the authority of someone who had not read the box carefully. I'll be there in 20 minutes, Emma said. She was there in 18. Nathan opened the door and she was standing on his porch with her jacket half buttoned and her hair still slightly damp like she'd rushed, which she had, he could see it, the particular evidence of someone who had not taken their time. And she looked at him and he looked at her, and neither of them said anything for a second. She called you, he said. She called me. She said you needed to come help with a puzzle. I do need to come help with a puzzle, Emma said, and walked past him into the house, and he closed the door behind her. He stood in his own hallway and listened to Lily's voice rise in pitch the way it did when something she'd been looking forward to was actually arriving, and Emma's answering voice, lower and steadier, saying something he couldn't quite make out that made Lily laugh, and the specific sound of the two of them in the next room together, familiar and ordinary and exactly itself. And Nathan Sterling stood in his hallway for a moment and did the honest accounting. A spring festival. A joke. 8 years of building something neither of them had named. An accidental truth. A month of careful navigation. A trip to Seattle and back. A conversation in a kitchen that had rearranged the furniture of everything. And now this. 2 voices in the next room over a bird puzzle on a Saturday afternoon. He'd turned down the largest business offer he'd ever received. He had not, for 1 second since making that call, wondered if he'd made the right decision. He went into the room with the puzzle. Lily was explaining to Emma the organizational system she'd developed for the pieces, which involved spatial categories she'd invented herself and which Emma was listening to with the expression of someone who was genuinely interested rather than performing interest, which was the thing about Emma that you couldn't fake. She was always actually listening, always actually present, had been for 8 years whether anyone acknowledged it or not. Nathan sat down on the other side of the puzzle. What section am I? He asked. Lily pointed at a pile of edge pieces. You do the border. You're good at the boring parts. Emma caught his eye across the puzzle board. There was something in her expression, quiet, warm, slightly amused, the specific look of a person sitting inside a moment they hadn't been sure they'd get to have, and he held it for a second before looking down at the pile of edge pieces. He picked up a piece. Tried it. It didn't fit. He tried another. Outside, the spring afternoon went on. The neighbor's kid went by on a bike. A bird landed on the porch railing for a moment and then left. The light in the room moved slowly in the way afternoon light did when nobody was counting minutes. It was not a dramatic moment. It was the opposite of dramatic. It was quiet and slightly tedious, and the puzzle was going to take a long time, and Lily's organizational system was going to make it take longer, and Nathan was going to do the border pieces until his patience ran out and then steal from the middle pile, which Lily would notice and object to, and Emma was going to be on Lily's side about it because she usually was. All of that was going to happen exactly as it always had, except that Nathan was no longer pretending he didn't know what it meant, or protecting himself from how much it mattered, or measuring the distance between himself and the thing he actually wanted. He was just here. He fit an edge piece into place. It wasn't the right one. He turned it around, tried it from the other direction. It clicked. He kept going. The months between that Saturday afternoon puzzle and the following spring festival were not a love story in the way movies described love stories. There was no montage, no sequence of golden-lit moments strung together to make the difficult parts look like they had texture without actual weight. What there was instead was the specific and unglamorous reality of two people trying to build something honest out of materials that included 8 years of established patterns. One 7-year-old with opinions, 3 jobs between them, a construction company in the middle of its busiest quarter, and the particular challenge of Clover Ridge knowing everyone's business before they'd fully figured it out themselves. Mrs. Farrell at the hardware store congratulated Nathan the Monday after the Saturday puzzle, which meant someone had seen Emma's car outside his house, and the information had traveled at the speed that information traveled in a town this size. He hadn't confirmed or denied anything. He'd bought the caulking he came for and said thank you in a way that Mrs. Farrell correctly interpreted as confirmation. And by Wednesday, the diner where Emma worked the morning shift had developed what Emma described on the phone as a significant increase in customers who don't actually need breakfast. People are coming to look at you, Nathan said. People are coming to evaluate me, Emma corrected. There's a difference. Looking is passive. This is active assessment. What's the verdict? A pause in which he could hear her pouring coffee for someone. Undecided. Mrs. Patterson thinks it's wonderful. Carol from the bank thinks it's complicated. Another pause. Dave thinks you're punching above your weight, which, to be fair, Dave the line cook? Dave the line cook. Well, I'll remember that the next time he needs the drainage issue in the back kitchen fixed. Nathan, you cannot withhold construction services from people who have opinions about your personal life. I'm not going to. I'm just going to remember it. She laughed, and the sound of it in his ear on a Wednesday morning while he was sitting in his truck outside a job site was so ordinary and so specifically good that he sat there for an extra 30 seconds after she hung up, which was not something he would have admitted to anyone. They didn't move in together. The conversation didn't happen for a while. There were too many other things being calibrated, too many first times for things that required navigation before they could become routine. The first time Emma stayed late enough that Lily was already asleep, and the question of leaving became logistically awkward. The first time they disagreed about something real, not a construction committee meeting, not a library fundraiser, but something personal and close in, about the way Nathan handled a conversation with Lily about her mother that Emma thought was incomplete and said so directly, and Nathan's initial reaction was defensive in a way that required an hour and a deliberate choice to hear it, rather than resist it before he could acknowledge she was right. Which she was. Which he told her. Which led to a longer conversation than either of them had planned about what it meant to co-parent something that hadn't been named yet with a person who hadn't been asked. That was October. The argument itself lasted about 40 minutes. The processing of it lasted 3 days. The outcome of it, a more honest understanding of what each of them was doing and what they were allowed to want, was worth considerably more than the discomfort. That was the thing nobody told you about building something real with someone you already knew. The familiarity didn't protect you from the hard parts. In some ways, it made the hard parts harder, because you couldn't use the getting to know you buffer, couldn't excuse friction as the normal adjustment between people who didn't fully understand each other yet. Nathan and Emma understood each other extremely well. When they bumped against something difficult, it was never because of a misread. It was because the thing was actually difficult, and they both knew it, and they had to deal with it as the thing it was, rather than blaming the collision on insufficient information. Nathan had expected this to be more discouraging than it turned out to be. Instead, it had the effect of making him trust the whole enterprise more, in the specific way that you trusted structures you'd actually tested, rather than ones that had only ever been looked at. Lily adapted with the particular flexibility of children who have been treated honestly by the adults around them. She didn't perform adjustment, she just adjusted, incrementally and practically, the way she adjusted to most things. Emma helped with homework on Tuesday evenings. Emma came to the fall concert at school and sat next to Margaret Sterling in the third row. And Margaret had held Emma's hand during the part where Lily's class sang a song they'd been rehearsing for 6 weeks, which Lily mildly botched on the high note. And Nathan had watched his mother hold Emma's hand in the dark of the school auditorium and felt something settle in him that had been slightly unsettled for 32 years. Emma and Margaret had their own relationship, separate from him, which he had not anticipated and which both women found unremarkable. They had coffee together twice in November. He was not invited. He didn't ask about it. Emma mentioned it once and he said he was glad, and she looked at him like she was checking if he meant it, and then seemed satisfied that he did. November was also when Emma quit one of her 3 jobs. The bookkeeping position at the accounting firm had been adding hours without adding compensation, and the situation had been building for months, and Emma had been managing it with the particular patience of someone who could not afford to be anything other than patient. Nathan had known about it since September, when she'd mentioned it in passing in the way she mentioned things that were stressing her, quickly, once, without apparent need for response. He had filed it and not pushed, because pushing was not what she'd asked for. In November, the accounting firm's owner asked her to cover a colleague's workload for 2 weeks while the colleague was out, on top of her own, without additional pay. Because you're so reliable, Emma, we really count on you. And Emma said no. Politely and without drama and completely. She called Nathan afterward and said, "I said no to something at work." And the way she said it, slightly surprised at herself, the way you sounded when you'd done something you'd been gathering courage for, told him exactly what that had cost and what it had meant. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Terrified," she said, "and also really good. You can pick up bookkeeping clients on your own," he said. "Set your own hours. I can connect you with 3 people who need exactly what you do." Nathan, not as a gift, as a practical observation. You're good at it, you have the clients who already trust you, and you'd make more per hour working independently than you make at the firm. A pause. "Are you trying to fix my career situation?" "I'm offering you information," he said, in the same tone she'd used on him approximately 12 times in the past year. "What you do with it is up to you." She gave a small, tired laugh. "That's my line. I learned from someone good." She took 2 of the 3 referrals. By January, she'd replaced the income from the firm with fewer hours. She kept the morning diner shift because she liked it. The people, the rhythm of it, the way it grounded her mornings. And Nathan understood that and didn't suggest she leave it, because there was a difference between helping someone and redesigning them, and he was trying hard to know the difference. He didn't always get it right. There were weeks where he overreached, where the instinct to solve problems that were Emma's to solve crossed the line from support into something else. And she told him, and he pulled back and they recalibrated. It happened enough that he stopped being surprised by it and started being grateful for it, because Emma telling him directly when something wasn't working was infinitely preferable to the alternative they'd both lived inside for 8 years. What he was learning, month by month in the ordinary run of their life, was that love between people who'd been friends first didn't come with the urgency of new romance, the acceleration, the intoxication, the feeling of discovering someone, and was better for not having it. What it had instead was depth, the kind of familiarity that let you be tired in front of someone without performing recovery, that let you be wrong without it becoming a referendum on your character, that let you sit in the same room doing completely separate things and have that feel like companionship rather than absence. He hadn't had that in his marriage. He hadn't known until he had this, that what his marriage had been missing was precisely that. Not passion or commitment or good intentions, but the bedrock of actually knowing each other as people before deciding to be everything to each other. He turned 33 in February. Emma threw him a party in his own kitchen because he refused to go anywhere for it, and 12 people crowded into a space built for 6, and Derek from work brought a bottle of something expensive and inappropriate for the occasion, and Lily wore a paper crown she'd made herself and informed everyone that the cake was carrot because that was Daddy's favorite, even though it was objectively the worst kind of cake, which Emma had allowed because accuracy mattered. It was not the kind of birthday party you photographed for anything. It was too loud, and the kitchen got too warm, and someone spilled something on the counter that nobody wanted to claim responsibility for, and Lily fell asleep at 9:30, sitting up in the armchair in the corner, paper crown still on, and the evening went long in the way evenings went long when nobody wanted to be the first one to end it. After everyone left, after Lily was carried to bed, Nathan and Emma cleaned the kitchen together in the particular comfortable silence of two people who'd done dishes together enough times that it didn't require coordination. Emma washed, he dried, the way it had defaulted to without either of them deciding it. "That was a good party," she said. "It was too crowded." "You loved it." "I didn't say I didn't love it." He dried a plate. "I said it was too crowded." She handed him another plate. "Derek told me the Seattle deal fell through on their end. The other partner, they were considering pulled out." He glanced at her. "Where'd you hear that?" "Derek told me. He wanted me to know you made the right call." Nathan set the plate in the cabinet. "Derek needs to mind his business. He thinks you're his business." She handed him a glass. "He's been with you since the second contract you ever won. That's loyalty." "That's stubbornness. Sometimes they're the same thing." She drained the sink, dried her hands on the dish towel, turned and leaned against the counter, looking at him in the easy way she'd been looking at him since October, the look that had stopped being careful. "Are you glad?" "About Seattle?" "You already know the answer to that." "I know what I think the answer is. I'm asking you." He folded the drying towel. "Every day," he said simply. She nodded, looked at the kitchen. "I like your kitchen," she said, in the non-sequitur way she sometimes arrived at true things. "It's a good kitchen. It's a little small. It's adequate." "The one in the house on Pemberton Street has an island," she said, with the studied casualness of someone who had been carrying a thought for a while and had found a sideways entrance to it. He looked at her. "I'm not saying anything," she said. "You said a very specific thing." "I said a house has an island. That's an observation." "The Pemberton house has been on the market for 6 weeks," he said. "You looked it up." She was quiet. "Emma." "It's a very good kitchen," she said, and the dignity with which she maintained this position was impressive. "Objectively." He looked at her standing in his adequate kitchen in February, dish towel still in her hands, the ghost of the thing she wasn't quite saying present in the space between them, and he understood, with the completeness of understanding something you've been approaching from every direction for a year, what the next thing was. He didn't do it in the kitchen on his birthday. He had enough self-awareness to know that the accumulation of the evening and the comfortable domesticity of doing dishes and Emma's sideways mention of real estate were conspiring to make him want to act immediately, and acting immediately was not how he made his best decisions. He sat with it for 11 weeks. Not because he was uncertain, because he was certain, and he wanted the certainty to be seasoned enough that it would hold when questioned, which he knew it would be. By himself first, by Emma when he got there, by the reasonable and responsible part of both their brains that knew the difference between a feeling and a foundation. What he did during those 11 weeks was watch, not calculating, not auditing, just paying attention to the thing that was actually in front of him. He watched Emma help Lily through a difficult week in March when Lily's mother called and said she wasn't going to make it to Lily's school performance because of a work conflict, and the way Emma had sat with Lily through the disappointment without minimizing it, or rushing it, or filling the space with reassurance that wasn't true. She had just sat with her, let her be sad, said, at the end of it, "I'm going to be there, front row. I'll bring the camera." And she had been, front row. with the camera, with Margaret Sterling beside her, and the two of them cheering with a disproportionate volume that made Lily both embarrassed and visibly repaired. He watched Emma handle a difficult situation at the diner in April, a customer who was rude in the specific way of people who treated service workers as furniture, with a composure that was not quite coldness and not quite patience, but something Emma-specific, the quality of someone who had decided long ago that other people's bad behavior did not require her to become less than herself in response. She handled it cleanly and without incident, and afterward he asked if she was okay, and she said yes in a way that was genuine rather than managed, because the difference between those two things in Emma was something he could read clearly now. He watched her be imperfect in the ordinary ways that people were imperfect. She was sometimes short when she was tired. She occasionally took on more than she could carry without asking for help until the moment it became visible to everyone. A habit from years of managing alone that didn't dissolve just because her circumstances had changed. She had a tendency when something bothered her to process it internally for longer than was strictly efficient before saying anything, which had improved since October but not disappeared, because people's patterns didn't disappear. They just became more navigable. None of it changed anything. That was the thing he'd been checking for, maybe. Whether the ordinary imperfections would erode something. They didn't. They were part of what was real, part of what he'd said yes to, part of the accountancy of actual love rather than the idea of it. By the first week of May, 11 weeks after his birthday, he knew what he was going to do and how he was going to do it. He called his mother. "I need to find a ring," he said, without preamble. Margaret Sterling was quiet for exactly 1 second. Then, "I have your grandmother's." He had forgotten about his grandmother's ring. His mother had mentioned it once, years ago, in the vague way you mention things that weren't yet relevant. A simple thing, she'd said. Nothing showy. His grandmother had been a practical woman who didn't trust anything that couldn't survive daily life. "Can I see it?" he said. "Come for dinner Thursday," his mother said, in the tone of a woman who had been waiting 11 months for this specific phone call and was being very controlled about her reaction to having received it. The ring was a narrow gold band with a single oval stone. Not large, not designed to announce itself, the kind of thing that lasted because it wasn't trying to be more than it was. He held it in his palm for a long moment at his mother's kitchen table while Margaret sat across from him with her hands folded and the carefully neutral expression of someone managing significant feelings. "Will she like it?" he asked. "Emma's not a person who decides how she feels about something based on what it costs," his mother said. "You know that." "I know, but will she like it?" Margaret studied him. "It's real," she said. "It doesn't perform. It doesn't try to be impressive." She paused. "Yes, she'll like it." He brought it home. Lily found it Saturday morning. Not snooping, just moving things on the kitchen counter in the specific chaos of a 7-year-old looking for the tape, and she came to find him holding it between 2 fingers with her head tilted to one side. "Is this a ring?" Nathan set down his coffee. "It's a ring." Lily looked at him, then at the ring, then back at him. The calculations visibly running behind her eyes had the focused quality of a child who had been thinking about this subject for approximately 3 years and was now processing the confirmation of a long-held hypothesis. "Is it for Emma?" she asked. "Yes." "Are you going to ask her to marry you?" "Yes." Lily considered this for a moment with the gravity of a Supreme Court justice reviewing a significant matter. Then she handed the ring back to him and said, "Okay. Can I be there when you ask?" He looked at his daughter. "Yeah, Lil, you can be there." She went back to looking for the tape, satisfied, the way she was satisfied when things went as they should. Nathan sat at the kitchen table with his grandmother's ring and his daughter's matter-of-fact blessing and felt the particular compound of terrified and certain that marked, in his experience, every decision that actually mattered. He chose the Spring Festival. It was not a subtle choice. He understood that and made it anyway because the Spring Festival was where the truth had come out the first time, accidentally and at cost, and bringing it back around to there, on purpose, at his own choosing with everything different, was the kind of thing that mattered to him in a way he didn't need to explain to anyone else. He told Emma they were going to the festival the way they always went. She didn't suspect anything, which he knew because Emma was not a person who performed not suspecting. If she had suspected, he would have been able to tell. She showed up at his house on the evening of the festival in a blue dress he hadn't seen before, and earrings that were small and not fussy. And she looked at him for a moment in the doorway and said, "Too much?" Because she was Emma and therefore uncertain about herself even now, even after everything. "No," he said, "not too much." Lily had already appointed herself the organizational authority of the evening and was distributing instructions from the back seat of the truck on the drive over. They would get food first, then the games, then the music, and at no point was anyone going to the face painting booth until after 7, because Sophie had told Lily the lines were shorter after 7, and Sophie was occasionally correct about things, even if not always. Emma listened to this itinerary from the passenger seat with the expression of someone genuinely charmed. They got food first. They did the games. The festival was the same as it always was. Same string lights, same band playing the same covers, same kettle corn and funnel cake and lemonade that was never quite sweet enough. Lily found Sophie within 4 minutes of arrival, which Nathan had predicted, and the two of them disappeared in the direction of the games area with the focused purposefulness of children who had a plan. Nathan and Emma found a bench. The same bench. He hadn't engineered it. They gravitated to it the way they gravitated to familiar things, without deciding to. Emma sat down and he sat beside her, and the festival moved around them the way it always had, the music and the voices and the lights overhead going gold and pink in the early dark. He was aware, with the specific awareness of someone about to do something irreversible, of exactly where they were and what had happened here a year ago. Emma was aware of it too. He could see it in the slight self-consciousness of how she was sitting, the way she was looking at the square rather than at him. "Hey," he said. She turned to look at him. He had not prepared a speech. He had considered one multiple times over the past 3 weeks, and every version of it had felt like a performance of something that should be plain. So he reached into his jacket pocket, and he took out his grandmother's ring, and he held it where she could see it, and he said, "I know what I have. I've known for a long time, and I spent a long time not saying it, and I'm done with that." He looked at her directly. "You showed up for me and for Lily for 8 years without being asked. You did it without conditions and without keeping score and without asking for anything back. And I'm not interested in spending any more of my life pretending that's just what friends do. Because it isn't. It's what you do. Because of who you are." He paused. "I love you. I should have said that 6 months ago and I didn't, so I'm saying it now, on record, in public, at the spring festival." Emma's eyes had gone very bright. She was not crying, but she was close, the specific close of someone holding on by the effort of it. "I'm not perfect at this," he said. "You know exactly how imperfect I am at this, because you've been watching for a year and you've called me on it multiple times, that's part of it. That's the thing." He turned the ring in his fingers. "I want to keep doing this with you, for as long as you'll do it. I want Lily to grow up with you in the room. I want—" He stopped. "I just want this. What we already have, but honest, all the way through." He held the ring out. "Marry me, Emma." She looked at the ring, then at him, then at the ring again, and her face did the thing. The complete, unmaintained thing, the face she made when she wasn't managing anything. And she pressed her fingers to her mouth for a moment, the way she had in the library side room, looking at an old photograph, and then she lowered her hand and said, with a voice that was not entirely steady, "You rehearsed that." "Some of it," he admitted. "Which part?" "The middle part. The beginning and the end I made up right now." She looked at him for a long moment. The festival kept happening around them, indifferent, the way life was indifferent to the weight of particular moments until you looked back at them. "I love you too," she said. "I've loved you for years. You know that. I know. I love Lily. I know that too. And I want you to know I'm not walking into this thinking it's going to be easy. I know you. You're going to make me crazy at least twice a week. You already do. I know. And I'm not perfect either. I'm going to take on too much and not ask for help, and you're going to have to decide to call me on it instead of just watching me drown because I don't always surface when I should." "I know that too," he said. "I've been practicing." She looked at the ring in his hand. "Yes," she said simply. He put the ring on her finger. It fit. He would tell his mother it fit, and she would take that as confirmation of something she already believed about the match, and she would not be wrong. Lily materialized approximately 90 seconds later with Sophie in tow, which meant she had been watching from a distance that was close enough to see the moment and far enough to pretend she hadn't been, and she pushed through the crowd with the single-minded directness of a child who had waited long enough. "Did she say yes?" Lily asked, looking directly at Emma. "She said yes," Emma said. Lily turned to Sophie with the vindicated composure of someone who had told you so. Sophie, to her credit, said, "I know, you told me," with the long-suffering patience of a best friend who had heard this prediction many times. Lily climbed onto the bench between them and wedged herself into the space that hadn't been wide enough for her, but which she occupied anyway, the way she occupied most spaces, thoroughly and without apology, and leaned against Emma's side and then, after a second, leaned against Nathan's, her slight weight familiar and real. "Can we get funnel cake now?" she asked. "Yes," Nathan said. "Can Emma have some? She always gives me her powdered sugar." "Emma can have whatever she wants," Emma said about herself, which made Lily consider this phrasing and then accept it as accurate. They got funnel cake. It was too hot, and they burned their fingers on it, and Lily got powdered sugar on her blue dress, which she discovered midway through the piece she'd claimed for herself, and examined with the pragmatic acceptance of a child who had learned that these things happened and that dresses could be washed. The band played. The lights went gold and pink. The festival went on around them the way it had gone on for 30 years. The same string lights and the same crowd and the same night air that smelled like fried food in early summer, and on the bench at the edge of the square, the same bench, the same three of them, and one extra, Sophie having been collected by her own parents somewhere around 8:30. Nathan Sterling and Emma Brooks sat in the spring night with a 7-year-old between them and the uncomplicated reality of having arrived, after 8 years of circling, at the place they'd been heading all along. It was not a perfect moment. Lily dropped her remaining funnel cake and was briefly devastated. The band played a cover of a song nobody at the bench particularly liked. Emma's phone buzzed twice with work texts she silenced without looking at, the particular discipline of a person learning to let some things wait. But there was a ring on Emma's finger and a child leaning against both of them, and the night was warm enough that nobody needed a jacket. And when Nathan looked over Lily's head at Emma, she was already looking back at him, and her expression was the one he'd been learning all year. Not assembled, not managed, not careful. Just real. Just hers. The thing about the story of them, the thing that nobody in Clover Ridge fully understood when they told it later, at the diner, at the hardware store, at the library display wall where their photograph from 6 years ago had been hanging for a year, was that it hadn't started at the Spring Festival. The Spring Festival was just where it surfaced, where the thing that had been built in the years before it finally got to be itself. It had started in a city planning meeting 8 years ago where they'd argued for 40 minutes and then gone for coffee. It had started in the slow accumulation of Sunday breakfasts and school performances and library renovation Saturdays and holiday dinners at his kitchen table. It had started in the photographs that Helen Marsh had carried in a cardboard box into a library side room, photographs that proved what neither of them had been saying, that they had been a family, in every functional and practical and emotional sense. For most of the time, they'd known each other. The wedding was in September. Not a large wedding, because neither of them wanted a large wedding, but not small either. The diner closed for the afternoon, and Carol put white lights in the windows, and the ceremony happened in the town square under the oak trees that had been arching over Main Street for longer than anyone present had been alive. Margaret Sterling cried through most of it and denied it afterward. Derek raised a toast that was long enough that Nathan had to make the cut signal twice. Helen Marsh came with 3 other library volunteers and sat in the 4th row and cried in the way of someone who felt personally responsible for the outcome, which she partially was. Lily was the flower girl. She had opinions about this role that she had been sharing since June, and which had resulted in a negotiation about the dress and the shoes and the specific flowers and the speed at which the flower girl was expected to process down the aisle, which Emma had navigated with the patience and diplomatic precision of someone who had been preparing for exactly this negotiation for years without knowing it. On the day, Lily walked down the aisle at the precise pace she had decided was correct, dropping petals with the focused care of someone who had practiced. And when she reached the end, she turned and looked at Nathan, and then at Emma, and then at the assembled crowd with an expression of such complete satisfaction that the crowd laughed, softly and warmly, the laugh of people who had watched this child and these two people and were genuinely glad. Emma stood beside Nathan under the oak trees, and they said the things people said at weddings, meaning them, which was the difference. And when it was done, and he kissed her, it was less like a beginning and more like a confirmation of something already true. Afterward, at the reception in the square, while Lily ran in circles with Sophie and Margaret, Sterling talked to Helen Marsh about the library's upcoming winter fundraiser, and Derek made questionable decisions about the open bar, Nathan found himself standing at the edge of it all for a moment, just watching, just taking inventory of the thing he'd built and almost talked himself out of. Emma found him there. She tucked herself under his arm the way she had started doing sometime in the winter, a small and habitual thing, and leaned against him and looked at the same scene he was looking at. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah." He meant it completely. "You?" "Yeah." She leaned her head briefly against his shoulder. "I've been thinking about something." "What?" "That joke," she said. "At the festival. A year ago." He exhaled. "My most useful mistake." "It was a terrible joke." "I know." "You were wrong, by the way," she said. "About what you said." He looked down at her. "Which part?" "The part where you said I'd never find a husband." She tilted her head up slightly to look at him. "Took me about 2 weeks, actually." He looked at her standing in her wedding dress in the town square of Clover Ridge, hair slightly loose from whatever she'd had it in, a smear of cake frosting on her wrist from helping Lily cut a slice that had gotten away from them. And he thought about the 8 years that had led to this specific evening and everything it had required of both of them, the patience, the honesty, the willingness to stop being afraid. And he thought about how none of it had been graceful or inevitable or particularly well-timed. It had been two people who were imperfect in the specific ways that happened to fit together, finally deciding to stop pretending otherwise. 2 weeks, he said. That's fast. I had a head start, she said. He pulled her in, and she let him, and the September evening held them the way Clover Ridge held most things, steadily, without ceremony, the way places held the lives that unfolded inside them, whether anyone was watching or not. Lily appeared at their side 45 seconds later, because Lily always appeared. Are you just going to stand here? She asked, with the impatient energy of a child who felt the reception was underutilizing its participants. For a minute, Nathan said. Sophie says we should dance. Sophie's been full of suggestions all day. Sophie is often right, Lily said, with the authority of a person who would not admit this to Sophie directly. Emma held out her hand to Lily. Come on then. Lily took it, looked at Nathan. You too. He followed his family onto the makeshift dance floor in the Clover Ridge town square, under the oak trees and the string lights that weren't up yet for the spring festival, but would be again next year, and the year after that, and the year after that, and he danced badly. He had always danced badly. While Lily laughed at him, and Emma did not disagree with Lily's assessment, and the evening went on the way good evenings went on. Not perfectly, just really well, which was more than enough. More, in the end, than either of them had known to ask for. Which was the thing about love that nobody advertised, the thing that didn't fit in a festival string light or a photograph or a speech at a rehearsal dinner, that the best version of it didn't arrive fully formed. It arrived in increments, in Sunday breakfasts and library renovation Saturdays, and arguments about conversations with 7-year-olds and kitchen tables, and the willingness, again and again, to say the true thing instead of the comfortable one. It arrived the way most things that lasted arrived, slowly, imperfectly, and exactly on time.